Hello, everybody. This is Antonio Wolf, Chapter 3, Dasein as an Actor, Stages, and Problems in the Development of the Fourth Political Theory by Alexander Dugin. And that's it, everybody. Returning back to Dugin, reading some more, and if you know who makes that voice, hopefully you find that as funny as I do. That guy is probably really annoying to talk to in real life. But anyway, it's me and the unnamed crew, which everybody knows anyways. It's me, Hyperion, Pedro, Joshua, and probably somebody will barge in the middle. Kind of seems to happen these days. So last time, chapter 1 and 2 is just kind of like Dugin complaining liberalism has destroyed itself because it won, and can't exist because it has no enemies, and its enemies got blown out of the water, so, we can't go back to those, so we need a fourth political theory. Now, what is that fourth political theory, and why? Well, we do not know yet. But chapter 3 is...
something to do with conventional Russian values.
Yeah, chapter 3, Dasein, some Heideggerian stuff is going to be going on. I don't know my Heidegger, so I'm not going to pretend to know, but I'm not going to pretend to like Heidegger either, or Heideggerians, particularly Heideggerians.
Yeah.
But anyways, let's keep going.
Okay.
Being oh god. Being a supporter of cyclical development and an opponent of Francis Bacon and his idea of data collection, I would still like to suggest that we develop and modify approaches to specific topics and areas of thought in an ongoing manner.
What?
So is he does he believe in the Hindu theory that history just repeats itself, no development?
Yeah. In what? Like he goes from the historical theory to epistemology, like out of the blue. Let's see how that goes.
Okay. I would still like to suggest that we develop and modify approaches to specific topics and areas of thought in an ongoing manner. We have repeatedly clarified the notion of conservatism. Not in this book.
Yeah.
Not what we've read. We conducted a series of conferences.
You actually haven't clarified shit, right?
Yeah, well, we conducted a series of conferences and scientific symposia on the fourth political theory. Oh, I guess he's talking about himself and whatever Russian group of people he's in dialogue with.
Not only Russian, not only Russian.
All right. Let us believe that these efforts, the results of which are published in magazines, scientific collections, individual monographs, and websites, were not carried out in vain, and that the readers are more or less familiar with them. Therefore, I propose to move on. Well, I'm familiar with nothing, but let's move on. I will demonstrate with concrete examples of what has been done to promote the discussion of the fourth political theory, and consequently the observable results of the activities conducted by the Center of Conservative Research at the Faculty of Sociology of the Moscow State University, St. Petersburg. Pedro, you read this book before. Is this chapter worth reading? Because that does not tell me that this is going to be philosophically important.
This is going to be like a series of examples of developments within the fourth political theory. That's basically it. But it is interesting.
Okay. And the St. Petersburg Conservative Club at the Faculty of Philosophy of St. Petersburg State University. These results include 2 books that were recently published in St. Petersburg. Oh god, I had to yawn. In the wonderful St. Petersburg Publishing House, Amphora. Alain de Benoit, Against Liberalism Towards the Fourth Political Theory, and Alexander Dugin's The Fourth Political Theory. Did he just... Did he just refer himself in the third person? Is that normal?
Yeah, it's
I
Russian
think
culture.
that's like normal in Russian, but like just like the translator didn't realize that. I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. The book by the philosopher Alain de Benoit, who spoke at St. Petersburg State University during the philosophy days in St. Petersburg, is a compendium of his views in philosophy and political science on major issues of our time: globalization, the economic and social crisis, the process of European integration, the new political and social trends, the relationship between Europe and Russia, humanism, etc. All these problems are addressed from the standpoint of criticizing the liberal ideology dominating the world, the first and most stable political theory. Having remained without competition after the collapse of communism and has become the priority target for criticisms by those who are acutely aware of the negative aspects of the status quo in politics, the social sphere, economy, culture, ideology, etc., and who are searching for an alternative. The old alternatives to liberalism, communism, and fascism have been historically overcome and discarded, each in its own way, yet they have demonstrated their ineffectiveness and incompetence. Therefore, the search for an alternative to liberalism must be held somewhere else. The search area is designated as the domain of the fourth political theory. Such an approach corresponds exactly to the stated theme: conservatism, the future, or an alternative. If we think about an alternative and correlate it with the blueprint for the future, then we should clearly realize that what that alternative is going to be. Then we should clearly realize what that alternative is going to replace. The answer is simple: liberalism as the dominant global discourse. Therefore, the only significant alternative should logically be directed against liberalism, hence the title of Alain de Benoit's book. Nevertheless, the question remains: does conservatism fit this role? In part, we heard the answer in de Benoit's speech, in which he criticized the liberal theory of progress. This philosophical approach proposes that conservatism is the most logical candidate for an alternative to liberalism, either as a relativizing worldview or as one rejecting progress altogether. What remains then is to specify the kind of conservatism in question. It is obvious that liberal conservatism cannot be considered an alternative to liberalism, being its variant. Thus, through the process of elimination, we can specify a proposition. We must look for an alternative to liberalism in non-liberal versions of conservatism. All this is logical, since de Benoit himself is known as a philosopher with conservative views. Sometimes he is referred to as one of the pioneers of the European New Right. But the particular kind of conservative views he has in mind is obvious from his newly published book. Boy, he really sucks, this Alain de Benoit's French cock.
Yeah.
Thought I was reading Dugin, not a love epistle, to Alain de Benoit. There's another aspect worth mentioning in regards to the title of de Benoit's book. Many readers will remember another ideological manifesto directed against liberalism called After Liberalism by Emanuel Wallerstein. I know Wallerstein. World Systems Theory. Despite the similarity of titles and the object of criticism, there is a significant difference. Wallerstein criticized liberalism from the point of view of the left, from the neo-Marxist position, and like any Marxist, he saw liberalism, bourgeois democracy, capitalism. God, why the heck am I Why am I yawning so much? Sorry. And like any Marxist, he saw liberalism, bourgeois democracy, capitalism as a phase of historical development, which is progressive in comparison with the preceding phases of development, such as feudalism or slavery, but is inferior to what must come after it, socialism, communism, etc. We're talking about the criticism from the left and in some ways from the standpoint of the future, which is expressed in Wallerstein's book's title, After Liberalism. This is a typical feature of Marxism. For de Benoit, neither the superiority of liberalism over the previous historical types of society nor the advantages of a communist future are obvious. Therefore, despite the similarity of titles, there is a fundamental difference between the author's initial positions. With Wallerstein, we have to deal with criticisms from the left, with de Benoit, with criticism from the right. Another difference involves the relationship to liberalism. According to Wallerstein, the end of liberalism is a foregone conclusion by the very logic of socio-political and socio-economic history. So he easily spoke of an after. For de Benoit, the question remains: one must fight against liberalism, yet in this morally and historically justified struggle, there are no guaranteed results. It is important to fight against liberalism here and now. It is important to identify its vulnerabilities. It is important to forge an alternative worldview. But the future is in our hands and is open rather than predetermined. Wallerstein, in varying degrees, is a mechanist, a mechanicist, like any Marxist, whereas de Benoit is an organicist and holist, like any real conservative. Yeah, I don't agree with that. So far, a lot of talking and not a lot of content.
Yeah.
Which I do not like in my theoretical books. Although
I don't like my theoretical books contentless.
That was just a whole bunch of jibber jabber of like, oh well, we got to fight liberalism. Well, with what? How? Why? His whole point that de Benoit sees no difference, no better or worse between liberalism and communism is idiotic. Even liberals will admit that there's clearly some improvements in some manners and some impoverishments in other manners between both things, so that you can at least make those distinctions.
I think that the point here is that one important characteristics of conservatives is that they are consequential empiricists, So take, for instance, one of the first of the conservatives, that guy who actually fought and reacted to the Great French Revolution. What is his name? Do you remember the name? I don't remember his name right now, but anyway.
Edmund Burke?
Burke, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
His argument against the French Revolution is that there's no such a thing as reason alone being able to conceive and validate institutions.
Burke is a serious scholar.
And his argument is actually consequential. His argument is actually consequential. The whole idea of the French Revolution is the idea that we could establish a society comprised of institutions which are not simply there by the authority of their perenity, authority of time.
No. What I find so funny about Burke's argument, though, is that he thinks the current institutions are justified based off of the fact of lineage that they were.
That's
being.
That's the only form of validation for him.
No, but if you go back to he was Northern Irish or whatever, where did the institutions he participated in, where did they come from? From people seizing it, he was living in England. The Normans went and seized it. The Anglo-Saxons seized it before him. But now when the French poor people, the peasants, when they seize power and try to make new institutions, that's wrong.
Yeah.
But his forefathers doing it is totally okay.
Yeah, that's one interesting point, Josh, because you can, when it is convenient to your political inclinations, affirm that a certain rebellious act, collective act, is actually derived from tradition itself, But if you think from a etymological point of view, in which you are a true empiricist, right? You are a consequential empiricist. The only source of knowledge, and not only knowledge, but also institutions, is history. History understood as facts, right? So the whole point of conservatism in Burke's times was to denounce reasons and illusions, you know? The idea that we could came up with new institutions which were not conditioned by previous traditional demands through reason alone, you know? And I think that what Dugin is talking about here when he talks about Benoit idea that there is no such a thing as progress between feudalism to liberalism and liberalism to communism is that the whole idea of progress implies a certain rational teleology which cannot be admitted if you are truly conservative, you know? Conservatives, they will admit the particularity of their conventions, but they will abide by them because there is nothing outside of it. One of the strategies of these dudes is to affirm the particularity of modern Western liberal values, which is interesting because it is the whole strategy of the new left also, right? So in the end, I think underlying these ideas is the idea that the only source of content is tradition, is convention, and these conventions they are not universal. They belong to certain civilizations and stuff like that. But your point, Josh, is interesting because you could make an argument that well, revolutions are traditional too, you know.
No,
Rebellions are.
that isn't the point I was making. The point I was making is like, well, the traditions that they're like deriving from had to start from somewhere that was different than
Yeah,
tradition. They made
yeah.
something
There
new,
was
and
always
so
that.
so
Yeah,
were they like acting like wrongly to
to the
you know
previous
go aside
tradition.
to depart from tradition?
Yeah,
But your whole tradition is based upon their departure from the previous
yeah,
tradition before
yeah.
them.
That's why I think conservatism is funny because it like the point that you choose to start counting what is tradition or not is completely arbitrary, right? I think that this is an aspect of the point we're making here. Like every new institution or convention, every institution and convention emerged historically, right? So there must be a time in which they were not around, and there must be a time in which they were indeed rebellious, right? But the thing is, I think the point here is that only the appeal to a certain set of values shared by a certain community in space and time is the form right is the proper or even existent form of validation of institutions. You can say to a true conservative that you believe that a certain institution because that is rational. For them, there is only positive right. There is no such a thing as rational right. You know, in the beginning of the philosophy of right, Hegel clearly makes this distinction, right? Like the nature, the natural, the philosophy of natural right is has as its object the rational determinations and the realizations of right itself. But for a conservative, there is no such a thing. There is no such a difference between a rational right, one which emerges from reason alone, and a positive right, one which emerges from the arbitrary context and conditions of a given people living in a given time, right? For conservative, there is only positive right, and I think what Dugin sometimes means that the liberal culture and agenda posits itself as something which is non-positive, right? Which is rational in a sense, and because it is rational, it is universal, applying to any people whatsoever, and even subordinating particular cultures. But actually, liberalism is not non-positive. It's actually another positive form of right, which is disguising of rational right.
Hmm.
And it's like what I find funny in Dugin, what I'm finding funny in reading him is not his intellectual prowess or capability of explicitness, because he's not very good at that. He's weak. Come on, guys. Like, at least by this book, he's very weak. What I find interesting is how he can like conveniently take this contemporaneous fashionable particularism and seeing through its formality, understand that it can be used to defend a fucking ethno-state. You know what I mean? A fucking new form of fascism. We don't want to be called fascism because fascism is not fashionable, you know?
That was a pretty good tangent. Just to clarify for those listening, positive in this case is not like positive, like between good and bad. Positive just means something that's just put forth, given. It's one of those like because it is kind of things.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the actual existing set of laws in a determined society is its positive laws. You respect it not because they are fair, not because they are based on justice, but because these are the laws of your people, and there will be coercion if you do not accept that. Now, like a law which, apart from being positive, is also rational, is a law which you can recognize by thinking through the concept of right alone. You could recognize its rationality, its necessity. I'm telling that for the listener. So this distinction is very important because it implies the idea that there is another source of institutions, but observation, history, all that depends from an external given. And that source is reason. If you deny reason, motherfucker, you will become either a dirty, filthy, formalist liberal or a sick conservative. In the end, that's the option,
Yeah.
Yep.
People must understand that.
We're continuing. The last item that I would like to draw attention to in regards to the ideas of Alain de Benoit and their relevance is the comprehension of Carl Schmitt's concept of the fourth nomos of the earth. That is, the relationship between political science and political theology, with geopolitics the new model of the political organization of space. On my part, in the book, The Fourth Political Theory, I had done a review of the three main political theories of the past. Isn't this the book, The Fourth Political Theory? Okay. I'm confused. I'm confused. Because this seems to be like referring to other things, and then it refers to his book as if it was written in the past. I'm what?
I think he's just another Russian thing.
Okay. On my part in the book, The Fourth Political Theory, I had done a review of the three main political theories of the past: liberalism, Marxism, and fascism, summed up in their overall balance, and attempted to identify the horizons for the development of the fourth political theory, beyond all three ideologies. This, of course, is extremely far from any dogmatism or a proposal of a complete answer to the stated problem. This is dogmatism, fuck you. But nevertheless, these are rather specific steps toward the preparation of closely tackling this issue. Without repeating what was said in my book, in the book by Alain de Benoit, I will try to make a number of remarks about the development of this subject. So I assume he's referring there to the prior chapters we read, but in those chapters all he said is like, communism, fascism failed, liberalism won. Liberalism needs enemies to exist. The enemies are gone. Therefore, liberalism has destroyed itself. We need a fourth political theory. He didn't really go into details as to why.
Like, the whole thing here is that this guy is not thinking. He has a clear agenda in his mind, he has a clear, established, dogmatically established political agenda, and he is simply writing to try to give this an air of justification. That the book is all about that. I don't think we are going to find really, really interesting stuff in here. I think the most interesting bits are those in which you are clearly. It is clear to see how conservatism also depends on the destruction of reason. That's what I find interesting here.
Okay, all right. Well, what the fourth political theory is in terms of negation is now clear. It is neither fascism nor communism nor liberalism. In principle, this kind of negation is rather significant. It embodies our determination to go beyond the usual ideological and political paradigms and to make an effort in order to overcome the inertia of the cliches within political thinking. This alone is a highly stimulating invitation for a free spirit and a critical mind. I do not really understand why certain people, when confronted with the concept of the fourth political theory, do not immediately rush to open a bottle of champagne and do not start dancing and rejoicing, celebrating the revelation of a new horizon. Well, I'm not dancing or celebrating because you haven't revealed shit, motherfucker. I mean, okay, just to mention something, it's kind of related, but it's much better than this, really. When Hyperion and I were first read, what was it, Prometheus and Atlas, that got us pretty excited. He hardly mentioned any politics, but when he did, and it was only a couple paragraphs, it had way more content than all these chapters we've read so far of Dugin. And it was genuinely, it was vague, yeah, but it definitely put forth some actually definite notion of a new horizon, a genuine fourth political theory, if one wants to use that convention name that he came up with. He hasn't presented anything so far.
Yeah.
After all, this is a kind of philosophical new year, an exciting leap into the unknown. The old year witnessed the struggle of three political ideologies, one that was bloody and that claimed millions of lives. All the criticism of liberalism was either fascist or communist. This criticism was less in the past, but the oldest of these ideologies, liberalism, is still here. I like how he doesn't include anarchism, because anarchism doesn't...
It doesn't count.
Liberalism is the remnant of the old year. It is residue, an uncertain past that was not properly sent into the oblivion. It has already passed, but does not want to leave permanently in any way. In short, it is a chimera, the dragon that swallowed the sun, or the diabolical spirits that kidnapped the snow maiden before the new year. In a sense, liberalism embodies everything that was in the past. The fourth political theory is a name for a breakthrough, for a new beginning. Underscoring the relevance of criticism and especially highlighting the fact that this is a radical rejection of all three political theories, liberalism, communism, and fascism, and their variants, I suggest we contemplate about the positive content of the fourth political theory. Oh, well, finally. The fact that we have identified the negative content is in itself remarkable and requires a thorough understanding. Yes, it's remarkable how undefined that negative content is. It's like saying, fourth political theory good, everything else bad. Ah, very clear. Thank you.
Fourth political theory necessary, everything else unnecessary and dead and past.
Yeah. The very idea to put an end to fascism, communism, and liberalism is an extremely stimulating thing. The negative program of the fourth political theory sounds as follows. Say no to fascism, no to communism, and no to liberalism. Liberalism will not work. It will not pass.
No pasará.
Much like fascism once failed, no ha pasado. The Berlin Wall too collapsed. Only dust remains from the only visible manifestation of communism, separating the communists from the capitalist liberals. The communists did not pass either. Now what remains is for liberals to not pass. And they will not pass. No pasarán. But in order for them to not pass, the fragments of the Berlin Wall are insufficient for us, as the wall itself was insufficient. The wall existed, but they still passed. Even less helpful are the dark shadows of the Third Reich, its independent corpses inspiring only the brutal punk youth and the disturbing perverted dreams of S&M devotees. Well, we all wish that
What the
the Nazis
was that, dude?
we all wish that Nazism had not passed in this sense. Unfortunately, we know it did, and it passed straight into the U.S.
Yeah, I think U.S. is the source of Nazism, man. It's the contrary. Like U.S. was the perfect example of an ethno state, at that time.
We had the Fourth Reich here. And its leader.
Devotees.
We had the Fourth Reich here, and its leader's name was what is it?
George H.W. Bush. It was the continuation of the third, but third leader. Hitler, Bormann, Bush.
Yep.
Schwab.
See, I will be on you for this guy, man. They're listening. But I didn't know that Nazis were like still existing only in the perverted dreams of sadomasochists.
Well,
I think Dugin knows some strange people,
right?
Wait, let's see. That is indifferent.
Okay, translators notes independent corpses. The author used the word nezalesnie in reference to the so-called Orange Revolution in the Ukraine and the Nazi sympathies among certain Western Ukrainians.
Yeah, it's just sympathies. It wasn't fomented or anything.
Okay. Sadomasochist Nazis. That could be even like a nice video game, Like you go about killing sadomasochist Nazis, and you are in their dreams.
I wonder if a certain someone we know is a sadomasochist.
Maybe.
Let's get it going.
So continuing, consequently, we suggest moving on in order to advance from the nihilistic phase of the fourth political theory toward positivity. Discarding the three political theories as a systematized whole, we can try to look at them from a different perspective. They are being rejected precisely as complete ideological systems, each on the basis of separate arguments, but they, like any system, consist of elements that do not belong to them. The three political ideologies own their own unique philosophical systems, groups, explanatory methodologies, their whole, a structure of their hermeneutic circle, their fundamental epistemes. They are what they are as a whole, dismembered into components that lose their significance and become desemanticized. A particular component of a liberal, Marxist, socialist, communist, or a fascist, national socialist ideology is not liberalism, Marxism, or fascism. It is not that they are completely neutral, but outside of the strict ideological context, they can find or discover a different, new meaning. The positive aspects in the development of the fourth political theory are based on this principle. A revision of the three political ideologies and their unconventional analysis can give certain clues to the substantive content of this theory. In each of the three ideologies, there is clearly a defined historical subject. In liberal ideology, the historical subject is the individual. The individual is conceived as a unit that is rational and endowed with a will, morality. The individual is both a given and the goal of liberalism. It is a given, but one that is often unaware of its identity as an individual. All forms of collective identity, ethnic, national, state-based, religious, caste-based, etc., impede an individual's awareness of his individuality. Liberalism encourages the individual to become himself, that is, to be free of all these social identities and dependencies that constrain and define the individual externally. This is the meaning of liberalism. English liberty, Latin libertas. The call to become liberated, Latin liber, of all things external. Moreover, liberal theorists, in particular John Stuart Mill, underscored the fact that we are talking about a freedom from, about the release from ties, identifications, and restrictions that are negative in their content. As to what the purpose of this freedom is, liberals remain silent. To assert some kind of normative goal is, in their eyes, to restrict the individual in his freedom. Therefore, they strictly separate a freedom from, which they regard as a moral imperative of social development, from the freedom for. The normativization of how, why, and for what purpose this freedom should be used. The latter remains at the discretion of the historical subject, the individual. While liberalism says it is for the individual, it actually isn't.
But as a assessment of liberalism's self-consciousness, this is a pretty good bit, I think.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I would say that it's for abstract individualism in like exactly the way he laid out. That's
Yeah.
Contentless, indeterminate.
Yeah.
Which is not individual, really.
Yeah, it's not individual.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think
But
that's probably where. I don't know. We'll see how he goes, but I doubt like he addresses that.
he
I think
will
he
not
just
go
like will
farther from that.
probably. Yeah, I'm guessing his response will just be individualism is bad because liberal abstract individualism is bad.
Yeah. That's his whole point. Like that's why he calls liberalism nihilistic, right? It lacks content. It's purely based in the caprice of atomized individuals. There is no such a thing as social conventional collective ties. There is no way of determining nothing but the form of consent. Like the content is left completely undetermined, and it's only determined by individual immediate inclinations, etc., etc., etc. It is the old critique of abstract will, right?
Yep.
But he has no idea of that. He clearly didn't read a good old philosophy of right.
Yeah, it's clear he did.
Yep. So, anyways, historical subject of the second political theory is class. The class structure of society and the contradiction between the exploiter class and the exploited class are the core of communist dramatic vision of history. Yeah. No.
What will you say, Antonio?
At least in the Marxist theory, the political subject or the historical subject
is the party.
For the revolution, it'd be the party, but in general, the historical subject would be the totality of that society. So, during capital, the historical subject is capital itself.
Yeah. I think he's talking about a historical subject in the sense of the subject of a change operated in the world. You know, that why it is historical. It relates to change, right? Those who bring about change in the world, actual historical change, not that common everyday change that we know, but actually like historical events, is class in the case of Marxism. It is the organization of the proletariat. We will overcome the bourgeoisie and establish I don't know, a proletariat dictatorship, etc., etc., etc. So in that sense, it makes sense because the subject of change would be the class, right? The organized class. In other words, the party.
Yeah. So that's a fair thing to say. I'm just saying, like, it's not really properly true, at least to the theory's expression of what it takes to be the broader historical subject. Now, if he's talking just about the revolutionary subject, then it's class.
In the end, capital will be brought, like the private property of capital will be brought to the end by the dynamics inner to capitalism itself, right?
Yeah.
And even class organization to overthrow the private property of the modes of production is a consequence of capital's development itself, right? I think that's what you're trying to say here.
Yeah,
maybe?
That it's the entire totality of that whole system, which is the imminent and also transcendental subject of the entire process, which manifests as class, yes, but it is not reducible to class. And then with the communist revolution, technically speaking, communism has no class, according to Marx. And so, what happens is that class is negated. And it's not that the working class wins, but rather that what was the working class in capital self-negates as a class, and therefore negates all classes.
Yeah.
All classes negate. It's a common ruination of the class.
But if you think from the standpoint of, like, political organization, what he's saying kind of makes sense, right?
No, it doesn't kind of make sense. It does make sense. I'm just saying, like, it's not exact. It's not properly true unless qualified.
Yeah.
But anyways, that's perhaps people would see it as nitpicking.
But let's be actually.
History is a class
we are
struggle.
we're dealing with a grown man here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go.
History is a class struggle. History is class struggle. Politics is expression. The proletariat is a dialectical historical subject which is called to set itself free from the domination of the bourgeoisie and to build a new society, new foundations. A single individual was conceived here as part of a class-based whole and acquires social existence only in the process of raising class consciousness.
He's going to talk. He's going to talk about Hegelianism here right now. This is going to be fun.
Okay, this last sentence doesn't strike me as true. That you acquire social existence only in the process of raising class consciousness. That sentence is false. I mean, obviously you exist in society whether you're lacking class consciousness or not.
Yeah.
I mean, Marx does allow for ideology or false consciousness. So you can be completely deluded about what you are, but you are what you are.
Yeah.
I do know some working class people who are poor as fuck, but they have the mentality of the bourgeois.
Of the nouveau riche, yeah.
Yep.
They are uninterrupted millionaires, That kind
temporarily
of
embarrassing.
Temporarily
I
embarrassed.
am not poor. I am temporarily broke, but treat me like a lord, because I will be one eventually. My hustling will pay off, motherfucker.
Yeah, so that sentence is wrong, at least in that context. Okay, and finally, the subject of the third political theory is either the state, as in Italian fascism, or race, as in German National Socialism. In fascism, everything is based upon the right-wing version of Hegelianism, since Hegel himself considered the Prussian state to be the peak of historical development in which his subjective spirit was perfected. Why didn't he mention Hegel With communism, what? Since Hegel himself considered the Prussian state to be the peak of historical development in which the subjective spirit was perfected. No, he didn't.
Yeah, what the fuck are you talking about?
I love it when people say that.
They actually didn't read, man. Shit.
Giovanni Gentile, who's a real philosopher with real content, so I'm told. A proponent of Hegelianism applied this concept to fascist Italy. In German, well, he didn't apply to fascist Italy. It wasn't even fascist when he came up with the theory of fascism. They were trying to. In German National Socialism, the historical subject is the Aryan race, which, according to racists, carries out the eternal struggle against the subhuman races. I haven't read the Nazi literature, so I can't vouch for whether that's true or not. I mean, certainly race had to do with it, but
It's in there.
Well, yeah,
Oh,
Hyperion, is that true?
Yeah, it's in there.
I mean, like the
Okay.
quotes. I'm sure the
I
quotes are
trust
actual
you.
quotes. I'm sure the quotes are actually quotes. I'm just saying, like, I'm not sure that that's like.
The blue, a
All we reduce
sophisticated
it to.
Nazi appears in Discord and say, actually.
Well, yeah, that's Hyperion.
Yeah, I'm bringing it back.
Don't mess around with
You
that,
voted
Josh.
for George H.W.
Did I? When I was 1?
Yeah. That's
Okay.
how much of a dedicated Nazi you are.
No, wait. That election was 88. I wasn't even born yet.
You are guilty.
Anyway.
Still.
No, yeah. Like, so the reason I'm saying that is just because, like, there is a difference between types of racism, and like, I always try to bring up
Yeah.
that the Nazis were far weirder than people are aware of.
Yeah.
They were fucking crazy. Like, this isn't just a race theory, like a biological race theory. It's a whole fucking metaphysics,
Yep.
which is the source of this race theory. I mean, the Aryan race, they literally thought was the descendants of fucking, like, superhuman,
Hyperborea.
yeah, Hyperboreans, the fucking Anunnaki or whatever you might want to call them.
Yeah.
And they think that they're a direct
different,
lineage
yeah.
from that. Well, you know, like, they were,
Photon.
yeah, they literally believed in, like, these spiritualist shit and supernatural powers, and that.
Yeah, these are the picture thinking of Nazis. But if we think about it, the basic idea is that there is a certain underlying division between human groupings, right? And these divisions have actually moral, intellectual expressions, right? Actually, there is a certain identity based on a certain actual physical difference too, which indicates it that transverses different individuals within an in-group community, right? And the subject of history would be those groups.
Yeah, be those groups, but it's not like that. Brace is the foundation; it's race is the conclusion, and the actual foundation is literally just this belief that they are linked directly to a transcendental, well, what we normally call not philosophically transcendental, but just like materially transcendental lineage, which is
and
physically
about
superior.
Race, like,
No, but I'm saying it's not about just the genetics. It's like the justification is not race. It's the conclusion. The justification is that they already assume that they are de facto superior or more powerful, and that this will just be the conclusion no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's not, we're white, and therefore, you know, whiteness is better, and we're better. No, they're like, we're better. That's why we are the top race.
Yeah, like
it's pure. It's Nietzscheanism.
Every form of racism will try to appeal to a certain ancestry bounds and ties to try to justify his actual superior position in society, right? This is like a basic racist move, you know. Like, why are you better than us? Why do you have more rights than us? Well, I have more rights than you because I belong to a strong and naturally superior lineage, and that's why. Because it runs through my blood a certain potentiality of competence and moral and moral upstanding that is superior to you. You are not as prone to become a fully subject and human being as I am because of my ancestry. Right, I have better genes than you, but you can also say that you can substitute genes by any metaphysical entity whatsoever. Right, you can say because God created me like this, like, and he created my whole community and my whole group like this, right?
Sure, you can say that, but in this case, it's power. Like the real foundation is race is the appearance, and the foundation is really power. Like it's just basic will to power. So,
Power in the
anyways,
sense also of physical.
yeah, physical, like real physical material
Yeah.
power, and
Yeah,
which then
yeah.
kind of is also intellectual power and all these other things. But it's really just power. But I just brought that up because I think that's goes deeper into like why the race things comes into it. Like it's not just race out of the blue.
Yeah.
The appalling consequences of this ideology are too well known to dwell upon them. Well, I assume they better be, especially for Dugin. I mean, they try to fucking wipe out the Russians. However, it was this original definition of a historical subject that was at the heart of the Nazis' criminal practices. The definition of a historical subject is the fundamental basis for political ideology in general, and it defines its structure. Therefore, in this matter, the fourth political theory may act in the most radical way by rejecting all these constructions as candidates for a historical subject. The historical subject is neither an individual, nor class, nor the state, nor race. This is the anthropological and the historical axiom of the fourth political theory. We assume that it is clear to us who or what cannot be the historical subject. But then who or what can? We cleared the space and correctly posed the question. We carried out our theme. We specify the problem of clarifying the historical subject in the fourth political theory. Now there's a gaping void. The gaping void is extremely interesting and significant. Heading into the depths of this void, we propose 4 hypotheses which are not mutually exclusive and which can be examined both collectively and individually. The first hypothesis suggests abandoning all versions of contenders for the role of historical subject from classical political theory, assuming that the subject of the fourth political theory is some kind of a compound, not the individual class, state, race, nation on their own, but instead a certain combination thereof. This is a hypothesis of a compound subject. The second hypothesis is to approach the problem from the standpoint of phenomenology. Let us place all that we know about the historical subject outside the framework of classical ideologies, carry out the Husserlian method of epoche, and try to empirically define that life world, which will open up before us. The life world of the political, one free from metaphysics or theology. Is it possible to consider political history without a subject? History as such? After all, theoretically, there were historical periods when politics existed, but when there was no subject in the philosophical Cartesian sense. Of course, in hindsight, even this pre-subject in political history was reinterpreted in accordance with various ideologies. But if we no longer trust ideologies, 3 political theories, then our historic reconstruction is not an axiom for us. If we consider political history in the style of the Annals schools, Fernand Brauddel's method, then we have the chance to discover a rather polyphonic picture, expanding our understanding of the subject. In the spirit of Peter Berger, we can open up the prospect of desecularization. Throughout history, religious organizations frequently acted as political subjects, or together with Carl Schmitt, we can rethink the influence of tradition on making a political decision, in the spirit of Schmitt's doctrine about decisionism. Discarding the dogma of progress will reveal a wide range of political actors operating up until and beyond the new age, which fits into the conservative approach. But we are free to continue our liberated search for what may come in place of the historical subject in the future. in the area of exotic hypotheses by Deleuze and Guattari about the rhizome, a body without organs, micropolitics, etc., or on the horizon of proto-history with Baudrillard and Derrida, text deconstruction, difference, etc., the authors knew, this time entirely not conservative, capabilities. Therefore, it is not worthwhile to reject them in advance and simply on the basis of their authors' sympathies toward Marxism and their leftist affiliation.
This is delicious.
The third hypothesis is about forcing the phenomenological method and rushing several steps ahead. We may propose to consider Heidegger's Dasein as the subject of the fourth political theory. Dasein is described in Heidegger's philosophy at length via its existential structure, which makes it possible to build a complex holistic model on its basis, the development of which will lead to, for instance, a new understanding of politics. Many researchers have lost sight of the fact that Heidegger, especially in the middle period, 1936 to 45, developed a complete history of philosophy centered around Dasein, which can form the basis of a full-fledged and well-developed political philosophy in retrospect. Oh, I did not know that. I thought he began that one line in Plato, and then we walked down to Piraeus, and then never made it further than that. Thus, accepting the Dasein hypothesis immediately gives us a broad coordinate system in order to navigate the construction of history necessary for political theory. If the subject is Dasein, then the fourth political theory would constitute a fundamental ontological structure that is developed on the basis of existential anthropology. We can map out a direction to specify this type of an approach. Dasein in the state, Dasein in social stratification, Dasein in power, the will to power, Dasein in power, being in politics, the horizons of political temporality, existential spatiality and the phenomenology of boundaries, the prince and nothing, parliament, the choice, and being towards death, citizenship and the role of the guardians of being, referendum and intentionality, the authentic and inauthentic in jurisprudence, existential philosophy of jurisprudence, revolution and the flight of the gods, urbanization in the house of being. Naturally, this is merely a cursory outline of the areas of interest in the new political science. Okay. The fourth hypothesis appeals to the concept of the imagination, l'imaginaire. This topic is covered in detail in the works of Gilbert Durand, or if they're French, it'd probably be Gilbert Durand. I don't fucking know. The basic ideas of which I discuss in my new work, Sociology of the Imagination. Imagination as a structure precedes the individual, the collective, class, culture, and race. If race exists as a sociological phenomenon, which is uncertain, as well as the state, according to Durand, who developed the ideas of Carl Gustav Jung and Gaston Bachelard. The imagination, l'imaginaire, forms the content of human existence based on the internal, original, and independent structures that are embedded in it. The interpretation of political processes in history a posteriori is of no difficulty for the sociology of the imagination, and it produces impressive results. If we interpret the imagination as an autonomous actor in the political sphere, including the projective component and a sort of a legal status, then we end up with an extraordinarily fascinating and totally undeveloped trajectory. Even though the students of 1968 demanded the freedom of imagination, in that moment they were unlikely to recognize the imagination as a contender for special political subjectivity. They remained trapped in the individual, a part of liberalism, even if that of the left, and class, that is Marxism, although strictly reconsidered on the basis of psychoanalysis. Boy, like the last four big paragraphs have been name droppings and like, isn't this interesting? Oh, this would be great.
Yeah,
and explaining nothing. I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Yeah. Well, take this fourth hypothesis over here. I think he is talking about, our present subjectivity can be structured in three ways. You can think yourself as an individual and you are a liberal. You can think yourself as a belonging to a class. and you are a Marxist. Or you can think yourself as belonging to a certain race or belonging to a certain state, and then you're a fascist, right? And the general idea, which I'm not right, I'm deducing things here, right? Because I didn't read the Dugin, but when he talks about this idea at the imagination as something which is internal, original, and independent uh, from these structures of individuality, class, and race. I think he's just trying to find a certain source of content for this fourth political theory, right? So not the individual, not the class, not the race,
Not
but
race or
something which is
state.
more original, more internal, more and more independent, which is imagination itself. Like that's the only thing that you can deprehend from all his talk. But yeah, you are right. It's name dropping and oh, take a look at this. This is so interesting. Oh, take a look at this.
Well, I mean, let it be said that the imagination thing, Durant's working off of Jung. Anybody working off of a Jungian model has a huge, very strong tendency towards fascism.
Yeah, yeah,
So this imagination stuff is not really an alternative here.
yeah. Because you are going to
not,
get into those kind of ancient archetypes which would previous to anything structure all our experiences, and then you will say that we should come to understand and recognize the activity of those archetypes in our contemporaneous life, and right,
yeah,
that's the whole like
and then
the
you get
general kind of argumentation.
yeah, and then you get the people who have better or worse access to that imagination. The Nazis were into this shit.
Yeah, yeah.
And the Jungian imagination is not just, oh, these things in my head. It's literally fucking witchcraft.
Yeah.
In search of the subject of the fourth political theory, you must boldly head into a new hermeneutic circle. The fourth political theory is a whole, which naturally is still insufficiently described and defined in parts. Its parts are the subject, which are also established as a preliminary suggestion. By moving constantly between the uncertainty of the whole and the uncertainty of its parts and back again, we gradually begin to clarify the more precise contours of what is at stake. This process, starting from the base of negative credibility, blah 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 blah, will lead to the clarification of a rather positive structure sooner or later. This structure will be further clarified when hermeneutics hits the boundaries of explicitly absurd contradictions, which cannot be resolved, or stops matching empirical data. That is, starting from a certain point, the development of the fourth political theory will gain rather scientific, rational characteristics, which, for the time being, are barely discernible behind the energy of groundbreaking intuitions and the revolutionary super task of destroying the old ideologies.
Amazing how eclectic he is, right?
Yeah, very
Like
eclectic.
he goes from Gadamer to Duran to Derrida and then to Besnois and stuff like that. He doesn't give a fuck, right?
And they have
Now
nothing
he's
to
talking
do with
about
each other.
hermeneutic circles. What?
And they have nothing to do with each other for a large portion, besides just the abstract, transcendental nature of the structures of the thoughts that they
Like
deploy.
what I think what he's trying hard to do is to give like a fashionable academic cloth to old conservative ideas. You know what I mean? Like, oh, I will talk about Deleuze and Guattari. Okay, they have those Marxist inclinations and affiliations, but I mean, the rhizome is something very interesting. Let's not negate in advance. Oh, there's also the Derrida with his difference and stuff like. Oh, and what about Heidegger? Oh, and what about the hermeneutic circle of Gadamer? He looks like a fucking rookie, you know, who is trying to like shoot for all the places and use all the concepts which are fashionable nowadays, but to try to give some like a small layer of intellectual credibility to simply Russian chauvinism. You know what I mean?
No, I completely agree. Like, this is somebody who is being dishonest. Like, he doesn't give a shit about any of these other things. Like, he's using it because he sees, oh, this is what the academic people in the West are into. They like to have a lot of citations. They like to do a lot of name dropping, and they like a lot of these thinkers. So I'm going to name drop them too, even though he's deploying nothing. Like, he's name dropping concepts, but he's deploying nothing. He's not using anything.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's becoming this kind of disgusting at this point, you know. But let's finish the chapter.
And it's for one, like, the people who are interested in this fourth political theory of his surely don't give a fuck about any of these things either. But they'll eat it up, not because they believe it, but because they'll be like, oh, we can use this too. We get one up on the leftists and everybody else because we can now, or at least they think that they can stand toe to toe with the other guys because now they can throw out the jargon too, even though they don't know how to use it.
Yeah.
And sadly, pathetically, I suppose it works because the debates I've seen Dugin with other people, he fucking wrecks them.
Yep. Yeah, but those guys also, they're not very good, man. Like, I mean,
but
he has a point. He has a point.
He's not debating names. He's debating quote unquote philosophers. Yeah,
but fuck those philosophers. Those are like, I will not begin to like on that direction. But what I mean is that I think he has one point only, which is clearly thought through, you know, and the rest is only this name dropping and taking fashionable concepts. Okay, how about we apply here the concept of hermeneutic circle of Gadamer to try to come to a certain definition of the fourth political theory? Okay, but his point, what makes him destroy people in debates is not that he's knowledgeable in all those things that he's citing. Is that he understood the basic idea of accusing liberals of trying to universalize a certain particular set of values.
Yeah.
Don't you agree? Like his whole point against Levy, right, was that okay? Leave us the fuck alone. You cannot accept. We do not accept that your set of values, your conception of humanity is universal and should be universalized through globalization. We have our own set of values. Leave us alone. That was his whole point. And Levy couldn't attack that. So Levy kept like doing, what about the Nazis? What about millions of people's dead? You know, like that was his whole point.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. That's the killer point that he has. You know, it's not any of his other stuff.
It's not. Okay, but what about But this point is an interesting point because in the end, it is the point of post-colonial theory too. You know, it is the point of many of those perspectivisms that we see, that there is no such a thing as episteme, right? There is no such a thing as a certain knowledge which is not conditioned by the structures of subjectivity or institutions of power or racial relationships or gender relationships, and that every and each epistemological actor is conditioned by something external which determines his thought, his thinking, and the content of his thought, right? But the person who thought this brilliant idea, right? There's always this exclusion. The man who comes up with this local epistemologies apparently is not being conditioned at all. But his whole point is that he got that. He got, okay, I got it. Like, liberals not think it is fashionable to be transcendental philosophers in a way or another. To think not thinking alone, but to think that which determines from the outside thinking. So they have come up with a whole lot of names to that. Being, difference, gender, race, power, etc., for me are all names of for this primary conditioner of thinking, which itself is outside thinking, right? Which itself is not reducible to thinking. And he understood that very well, and he saw that, well, if being conditioned, and there is no such a difference as episteme and doxa, well, so every doxa is equally valid, and we Russian have our doxa, and we will fight for it. We will not accept liberalism as universal. That's his whole point. And then he's write these books trying to give some intellectual validation to Western eyes, right, for his ideas.
Yes.
Why he's name dropping Gadameryan concepts here, right? Why he's doing that?
Western.
Alright, continuing. The entire hermeneutic circle of the fourth political theory should be included in the fourth nomos of the earth. This inclusion will specify its content in even more detail, and in particular will reveal a colossal epistemological potential of geopolitics. The latter, in addition to its purely practical and applied objectives, can be viewed as a broad invitation to think spatially in a postmodern scenario when historic thinking, which dominated the modern era, is becoming irrelevant. On numerous occasions I have written about the philosophical and sociological potential of geopolitics in my works. Spatiality is one of the most important existential components of Dasein, so the appeal to the fourth nomos of the earth can be tied to the third subject hypothesis of the fourth political theory. Now we can approach the problem of the content formation in the fourth political theory from another direction and examine the contenders for inclusion in this theory from the three classical models. Just let me see where this ends. 37. Alright, we had 12 pages more to go. However, prior to determine the aspects of the three old ideologies that can be borrowed from them, having neutralized them and taken them out of context, ripping them out of their own hermeneutic circle, it is important to briefly mention what aspects must be firmly discarded. If we begin with fascism, National Socialism, then here we must definitively reject all forms of racism. Racism is what caused the collapse of National Socialism in the historical, geopolitical, and the theoretical sense. This was not only historic, but also a philosophical collapse. Racism is based on the belief that the innate objective superiority of one human race over another. It was racism, not some other it was racism, not some other aspect of National Socialism, that brought about the consequences, which led to immeasurable suffering as well as the collapse of Germany and the Axis powers, and the destruction of the entire ideological construction of the Third Way. No, it wasn't. What brought National Socialism down is that Hitler was a retard and decided to try to bite off more than he could chew at the wrong time.
And they decided to give up because they could have won. They just didn't want to show their toy. Cards.
They had a bunch. They had a bunch of other shit that people have no idea about. And Germany may have lost, like we said, but the Nazis didn't.
Yeah, the Nazi International one. German army surrendered. SS didn't.
The criminal practice of wiping out entire ethnic groups, Jews, Gypsies, and Slavs, based on race was rooted precisely in the racial theory. This is what angers and shocks us about Nazism to this day. In addition, Hitler's anti-Semitism and the doctrine that Slavs are subhuman and must be colonized is what led Germany to enter into war against the USSR. for which we have paid with millions of lives, as well as to the fact that Germans themselves have lost their political freedom and the right to participate in political history for a long time, if not forever. They are now left only with economy and the best case scenario with ecology.
With ecology, that's why there are so many vegans, man. In Germany.
Well, wasn't Hitler a vegan too?
Yes.
And that's why they don't use plastic straws. Like, they get mad at that, you know? Like, the only way of expressing my idea of good is through ecology, guys. At least that's what Dugin said. So that's why I use, like, bamboo straws in my brunch.
How old is this?
In my smoothie.
2000... Wasn't it 2009?
Is this before?
Or is that a second edition?
Thornburg?
Well, duh.
I don't know. Josh, my historical awareness.
She could have only been around for like a couple years.
I didn't even know what you said. Yeah, of course.
Well, no, dude, I don't fucking remember what time this shit happens in. Like, it just fucking melts in my mind. I don't care. Like, it could have happened more than a decade ago.
17?
Also, like, Swedish, not German, just for the sake of, like, Germany's, pride.
Yeah.
I don't know.
See, I don't even know what fucking nationality is.
How dare you! My future is gone.
It's Ricky's sister.
That would be amazing.
Anyways, there you go. For those of you listening, that's how out of the loop I am. I don't pay attention to anything in the news. I think I was just like thinking about that because like Zizek has talked about her, and like Zizek has been talking about shit forever.
Do you pay attention? You don't pay attention to the news, but do you pay attention to the olds?
Whoa, Josh.
Josh,
that was deep, dude. Like, that was digging deep, you know? I think to be able to give a better definition to the fourth political theory, we should stop to pay attention to the news and pay attention to being and the odes, you know?
Yeah.
Right, Josh?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, he dug in deep.
My book. I'm making the.
He's digging, digging.
Yeah, he dug in deep into his ass. That's what.
You know, Antonio. I think we should begin the fifth political theory. Fuck this
Gay
shit.
politics already exists, Josh.
Yeah, it's just the first political theory.
I think like he's going to begin talk about like skinheads after this.
Well, he's gonna talk about Ukrainians.
Why limit it to that? Why not skinwalkers? German
Let's
witches.
just go and finish this shit.
The supporters of the Third Way were left in the position of ideological outcasts and marginals. It was racism in theory and practice that criminalized all other aspects of National Socialism and Fascism, making these political worldviews the object of curses and vilification. Hitler's racism, however, is only one form of racism. This type of racism is the most obvious, straightforward, biological, and therefore the most repulsive. There are other forms of racism. Cultural racism, asserting that there are high and low cultures. That's not racism. I'm sorry. Like, Americans are really low culture. It's the bunch of races in America. It's not a race.
Except jazz. And, except black American culture. But, there are low cultures throughout history. It's obvious.
Like the U.S.?
Doesn't mean that those low cultures have nothing to offer. Anyway, this is culture versus civilization. Anyway.
Civilizational? Dividing people into those civilized and those insufficiently civilized?
Mm-hmm. Civilization, I'll stay right here.
Which, by the way, I don't know what he means, but it seems by like civilization, most people just mean culture, but if it's meant specifically, it usually means, do you have a developed economy? No, you're uncivilized.
Culture is not your friend.
Ecological, social, economic. Like the thing here is that he doesn't understand that all these determinations, civilization, culture, in the mindset of a racist, should emerge from racial superiority. So you cannot talk about cultural racism without saying that the reason of this highness or lowness of certain culture are based on race. You cannot talk about civilizational if you're not referring to a certain pre-civilizational racial difference. Otherwise, it doesn't mean a thing to talk about civilizational racism in specific. You know, you can talk about civilizational chauvinism, but he's kind of dumb here, and he's clearly trying to not be accused of racism, right? Like he's clearly trying to like he.
I don't know. I think he's
around...
sincere, but he's dumb.
Yeah,
well, you can't be oh yeah, I agree with the Nazis when you're Slavic.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
And when you're like in the political context of wanting to denounce the Ukrainians as Nazis as a Russian,
right.
When they are, you know, they are clearly Nazis, and you do want to oppose them.
Josh, how could you say that?
Yes, every single Ukrainian ever is a Nazi. That's what Josh said. Just so we're clear.
Not all Ukrainians, Josh.
Okay, continue.
Alright, social or technological, viewing technological development as the main criterion of societal value. Social, stating in the spirit of Protestant doctrine of predestination that the rich are the best and the greatest as compared to the poor. Well, that's only one interpretation of that doctrine. The economic racism, based on which all humanity is ranked according to regions of material well-being. And evolutionary racism, for which it is axiomatic that human society is the result of biological development, in which the basic processes of evolution of species, survival of the fittest, natural selection, etc., continue today. The European and American society is fundamentally afflicted with this type of racism, unable to eradicate it from itself despite all the effort. Fully aware of how revolting this phenomenon is, people in the West tend to make racism a taboo. However, all this turns into a witch hunt. New pariah is accused of fascism or its victims, often for no apparent reason. Thus, this very political correctness, this very political correctness and its norms are transformed into a totalitarian discipline of political, purely racist exclusions. In this manner, the institutionalized French left liberal anti-racism itself gradually becomes the distribution center of racial hatred. Even Africans suffer from being accused of fascism. Such was the case of the unrestrained defamatory campaign against a well-known black comedian, Dieudonné Mabala, who dared to mock certain hideous features of the contemporary French establishment in his routines, including anti-racism, ras le front, sauce racisme, etc. And then what? African comedian Mabala was admitted into the brown category, that is, accused of fascism and racism.
Oh,
well,
like,
I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised.
It was the most pathetic part of the text until now. Like, this is like an old dude rant. I can't imagine he's saying that while he's doing barbecue, you know, and asking his son to bring here a beer, you know what I mean?
I guess.
Like, what the fuck, man? Okay.
Well, look.
I don't even have any comment
this
on
doesn't
that.
surprise me, because, for one, the French are hypocrites, and this is well known. they've always been that way. So they preach anti-racism, but everybody knows they're racist as fuck, especially if you're not French and Muslim. And he's probably not French, and he's probably Muslim, being African and black. I mean, that's like three bad things. The French are not gonna accept your criticism no matter what, even if it was valid. The newest types of racism are glamour, fashion, and following the latest informational trends. The norm is set by models, designers, party socialites, and the owners of the latest versions of mobile phones or laptop computers. Conformity or non-conformity with the glamour code is located at the very base of the mass strategies for social segregation and cultural apartheid. Today, this is not associated directly with the economic factor, but is gradually gaining independent sociological features. This is the ghost of the glamour of dictatorship. Glamour dictatorship, the new generation of racism. No. I don't see how that has to do with race as such. It can be. Probably is, but... The very ideology of progress is racist in its structure. The assertion that the present is better and more fulfilling than the past, and the assurance that the future will be even better than the present, represents the discrimination of the past and the present, the humiliation of those who lived in the past, and insult to the honor and dignity of the previous generations, and a certain kind of violation of the rights of the dead. In many cultures, the dead play an important sociological role. They are considered to remain living in a certain sense, present in this world, and participating in its existence. Such are all ancient cultures. Such are all ancient cultures and civilizations. Billions of inhabitants on this earth believe in this concept to this day. In the Chinese civilization, built upon the cult of the dead and upon the reverence toward them, alongside the living, being dead is regarded as a high social status, in some way superior to the status of the living. The ideology of progress represents a moral genocide of the past generations. In other words, real racism. Equally questionable is the idea of modernization. When it is taken as a self-value, it is easy to detect the obvious signs of racism in it. Well, at least this was funny because
that's the problem.
He's doing what the left does. Not the Marxist left, but like the liberal left.
What I think it's funny here, this is like the landmark of abstract thinking, right? He recognized a certain determination in the concept of race, which is an aggregate of determinations, right? So he found out this specific determination of race, which is like hierarchy, right? And the idea that of superior and inferior, right? The idea of high and low. And the problem is that, and then he calls it like racism, as if racism wouldn't have any other kind of determinations, right? And then he starts to use this anti-racist rhetoric, even to protect the dead from the racism of the living. You know what I mean? This is pathetic, dude.
It is bad. It is bad reasoning.
Man.
It's bad reasoning, but it's a good aping of what the liberal left does.
You say to the guy, like, Black Lives Matter, and the guy says, you know who suffers racism? And who? The dead. Because the youngsters don't respect the past and the dead. What the fuck are you talking about, dude? So you can actually, like, for example, take the word chair and call everything a chair. And you ask the person, well, because why are you calling that a chair? And the person says, well, I'm calling that a chair because it occupies space, as a particular point in space. But that's not the essential definition of chair, That's what not makes its distinctiveness against other objects. But this is a determination of chair. Real chairs occupies space. I think that's what's going on here. He takes something, he takes out of that something what he thinks is.
I think what he might be. I'm trying to find something intelligible in what he's saying. I think what he's trying to say is the fact that we're moving away from the values of the dead is a very Western centric one, and that this idea of progress, that we're better than those who were dead before us, is would be insulting to the Chinese or whatever. And it's an assertion of modern Western values over other civilizations' values. Maybe that's what he's trying to say.
Look, this is what he should have. This is what he should have said. This is me improving his dumbass argument. He should have said this is literally cultural genocide, and it would have made sense. How dare you forget the past? You're genociding cultures by forgetting them.
Yeah.
But this is a typical cynical right-wing move in which they're like, I'm not the racist. Actually, you're the racist. And because they realize, racism is a very touchy topic, and they take racism very seriously. So if you accuse them of racism, they're going to be put on the ropes. The thing is, you actually have to have a brain to do that, and not do it, like very stupidly, like you just did right here.
You mean? Yeah, because this is becoming retarded. Completely. Nothing against like retardeds, like that's not the point here, guys.
Yeah, sorry to compare you guys with Dugin's thought process here.
Exactly. That's my whole. Like I could debate this dude, man. Okay, let's go.
By the way, this is a pretty racist thing for him to say, because the probably more than half of China now doesn't really believe in any of this like old ancestor worship stuff, mainly because the Communist Party outlawed it and destroyed much of it, and literally just made it a generally unknown and well, it's not unknown, but it's just not part of life anymore. So many people aren't really doing it anymore.
The whole ancestor worship thing is actually, I feel like, basically what Western conservatives believe. Because I remember, like, when I had to read Burke for some class, I was reading this and I'm like, God, this is exactly like what we were reading about the Chinese ancestor worship, where they, like, actively play a role in determining our politics today.
Yeah. Like, the past is the source of authority. Period. I think that's one of the basic...
And they play an active political role. It's not just that, like, they influenced how things are today, but they actively play a role in shaping how we're supposed to make our decisions.
Yeah, people are like, you can't change what George Washington did. Are you saying you're smarter than George Washington? Yeah, motherfucker.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying, motherfucker.
You're not a high-level Mason, AW. I don't know.
I don't want to be.
Not that you know. If he was, you wouldn't know. No.
I would know.
Oh.
Because I would be as well. I told him I'm not joining the Masons unless he does.
I don't think I'd join a lodge where they would accept us as members.
That's true. Thanks for referencing my favorite comic.
I think we could finish for today here, man.
Yeah, it gets repetitive and it's quite. There's still about 10 pages left.
Yeah,
and this was a funny little note to end on.
Let's call it a day, Dugin. You lose us here.
Look,
teach me how to Dugin. It's very easy. So
I'm not racist. You're the racist. I didn't bring up race. You brought it up.
The two first chapters, I think, are pretty much enough to understand the general point that will be made and remade and restated, like in the whole book, right?
Mm-hmm.
Seems so.
Dugin would love Zootopia and Trolls.
Oh yeah, God. Go read our review if you haven't. I'll probably link that. I like that review.
Okay, guys, thank you very much. We are going out. That was Dugin, embarrassment in person, and have a good night.
Yeah. Not digging Dugin too much. Kind of got boring this chapter, so I think we probably
himself into a hole.
Yeah, we won't be reading this any further. We'll see what we read next. See you around, everybody.